everybody. I'm Erika Sanzi, Director of Outreach here at Parents Defending Education. This is our version of book TV, as we have two authors with us who are going to tell us about the new book that they wrote and just came out last week. So needless to say, they are having a crazy week. The book is Stolen Youth: How Radicals Are Erasing Innocence and Indoctrinating a Generation. I actually have my own copy right here. And as you can see, I have been taking notes. And the book has been out for less than a week, and already it is a bestseller, not only on Amazon, but also in Publishers Weekly. Okay, about these authors. Karol Markowicz is a weekly columnist at the New York Post and Fox News, a contributor at Spectator World, and a contributing writer to the Washington Examiner magazine. She has written for a ton of publications, and most importantly, she is the mother of three. Karol is also on our board. Bethany Mandel is a contributing writer for Deseret News, an editor of the children's book series Heroes of Liberty, and a columnist for Fox News. She also has written for a ton of publications, and she is the mother of six. And I should say that Bethany isn't just the mother of six, she's the mother of a newborn. So needless to say, yeah, you can't see the baby, but we've been able to sort of hear the baby a little, and you may too. So we're very grateful to both of you for joining us. I've been just sort of watching the past few weeks play out. I know that you're extremely busy. Between the two of you, you have 9 school-age children. Again, one is 2 months old. And so we are really grateful that you were able to find some time for us. So thanks for being with us.
Thank you, Erika.
Thank you so much for having us.
Okay. So the first question is, how did you two come together to write a book? And then I guess also let us know sort of like why this book. Karol, I'll go to you first.
Bethany and I have known each other a while. We write on very similar topics. We're both in the culture space. We found that over the last few years, we were covering similar topics and talking a lot about children's issues. But we have very different paths. Bethany is a homeschooling mom of 6. I have 3 kids, as you mentioned, 2 in public school, 1 in private. And we thought we could present a range to parents, both on what the problems are that exist that we see in our own lives, and both having solutions that are different from each other. So we had been thinking about writing a book together for a while. The original title that we were kind of throwing around was Keep Your Village Off My Child. And this one seemed like the right moment where we saw the forces of wokeness and leftism converging and forcing their views on our children. And the damage that we saw being done to kids was really magnified throughout COVID. And that really is where we decided we have to do this. This is the project for us to do together. And this is the project for us to do right now.
Bethany, you want to add anything to that?
No, I mean, there was, there's a chapter in our book about COVID. And as we were sort of trying to think about, this ideology is seeping into all of our children's lives. And we have chapters about every direction from which this is coming, from the media, pediatricians, in sort of mental health sphere. It's sort of like an all-encompassing view, if you imagine like a child and like every sort of touch point in their lives, school, you name it. We sort of wanted to draw that circle of how it's coming at them from every different angle. I love being on video and being able to do that motion. And COVID felt a little bit like an out of place chapter, like how does this fit? But for us, we really saw COVID as this ideology stepping on the gas and realizing that they had a lot more success in their efforts to sort of silence people from ever speaking up and speaking out for children. This ideology is propagated by force and by intimidation. And we saw that in really stark terms during COVID. And so we have a COVID chapter in there, and I think it's, and Karol wrote it, and I think it's one of the most powerful. But it's really a pervasive ideology that is hitting kids from all sides.
Yeah, I mean, we here at PDE obviously know that we focus mostly on the school side. And so what we're seeing are primary source documents every single day that confirm what you're describing. One of the things that in the beginning of the book that you talk about is, and you use, Karol, I think this is one of your chapters, you use the word authoritarian, you use the word totalitarian, and then you, Bethany, I've also heard you talk about forced conformity. Karol, can you talk just a little bit about your background and what draws you to sort of use those terms? And then maybe we'll bump over to Bethany and you can talk about like how this looks like forced conformity in our schools.
I was born in the Soviet Union, and throughout my life in America, I think people have used the examples of, Soviets or Nazis or whatever. They always want to kind of draw the parallels. And throughout my life, somebody would say, like, doesn't this seem Soviet to you in the Clinton years or something? And I'd say, no, it really doesn't. But the last few years have seemed Soviet to me. And they really harken back to a lot of the conversations that I had with my parents, my grandmother, and the way that their lives were there. It felt very familiar to me to the way we were living here. Again, back to COVID, a lot of people felt like they couldn't say what they believed to be the truth on things that were really basic, like should schools be open? Everything else is open. Every bar, every restaurant, everything is open, but schools are closed. And you couldn't say, schools should be open. Here's the data. There's no reason for them to be closed, because you'd be called, you want teachers to die and you're a grandma killer. And you weren't allowed to have certain opinions. And that enforcement came from, yes, not the government necessarily, although they did work with social media to shut down certain opinions. But it came from your neighbors. Neighbors would call the police on each other. If there were too many people in each other's backyards, neighbors would attack each other online for having really basic opinions. And it wouldn't just be like one person arguing with one person. It would be a deluge of comments, basically forcing that person back into line. And so the totalitarian ways of other countries only allow for certain opinions. And what we see as the woke, virus throughout the country. And, we get asked, what's the difference between leftism and wokeism? Well, the difference is leftism is a problem in and of itself to me. I think when you push that ideology onto children specifically, but wokeism does not allow you to step outside the lines at all. You're only allowed to have certain opinions. You're only allowed to talk about those opinions in a certain way, and you must conform to whatever the new language is at any time. So it is very totalitarian. It is very authoritarian. And the societal pressure of that conformity is something that I'm afraid has taken hold in America. And I think we should all fight.
Bethany?
So you sort of want me to tackle sort of what this looks like in schools?
You talked about that. Yeah, because I know that, you've talked about this forced conformity, right? This pressure to conform. And maybe just give a couple examples or what comes to mind in the K-12 space around that concept.
Maybe I should do that just because Bethany's a homeschooling mom. I feel like we divide like I cover the school stuff, but I mean, just because I have more experience in it, but I mean,
I'm happy to have you take that one. And then I have a more recent example of the mob forced conformity.
Well, so I would say in the K through 12 space, a lot of teachers who don't want to push the kind of leftism that the teachers unions, for example, want them to push, or the school boards, which have been almost uniformly leftist until the last few years. The teachers who don't want to participate in that really put a target on themselves. We hear from teachers all the time who say, I don't want to teach this to my students, but I'm being, kind of forced to through the administrations. I mean, little things like, we barely teach history in schools at all. And when we do teach, when the kids do get history lessons, it's usually in the form of the holidays. Columbus Day is now out. I mean, they barely get a mention of Columbus. But other things, like schools are starting to phase out, like even talking about Thanksgiving. Can you really talk about the Pilgrims and Native Americans? And, it gets touchy. And then it's like, the removal of statues in places, removal of like George Washington's name off of school buildings. They're starting to phase out the founding fathers too, because they were imperfect people, and you're not allowed to, you have to, sanitize history And the kids end up learning a really skewed perspective on so many different things because the leftist way of handling everything is taking over. And so the teachers might want to teach about, Columbus, but it's no longer part of their curriculum. It's no longer part of what they're supposed to be discussing with the kids. So, the conformity of that and the way that you're only allowed to discuss topics in this really narrow way. And if you do discuss George Washington, you have to paint him as a villain because he owned slaves. It's having an effect, on these children and on our society in general. A society that cannot talk openly about its history, the good and the bad, that is totalitarian. That's the erasure of facts and reality.
Yeah, there's so my husband is the editor of the Washington Examiner magazine, and he had a great piece by Quinn Hillier recently about how all of the homes of the founding fathers, George Washington, James Madison, they are starting to do the same stuff. And so, from a homeschool perspective, going to Mount Vernon, bless you, going to Mount Vernon is extremely educational. And we've noticed over the course of the last few years, the hyper focus on the bad, on Washington slave owning, has really detracted from the experience at Mount Vernon. I have written about this as well, and I have a source within Mount Vernon who is extremely frustrated. And he says, like, I'm here to teach history and to excite children about George Washington, and that's the programming that we're offering schools and students and homeschoolers, you name it. And I feel like I have to stand there and sort of prostrate myself about the negative to such a degree that at the end of it, the kids come away with not a great feeling about Washington and about Mount Vernon. And from a fundraising perspective for Mount Vernon, I don't know how you continue when you're like, this is the home of a guy who wasn't so great. Would you care to donate and come back? I mean, it's suicidal what they're doing, and it's happening at a lot of different sort of living history sites around the country, both around our founding fathers, Colonial Williamsburg. It's happening there as well, and so I don't get into it in the book. But this is a whole other aspect. I mean, I think that homeschoolers feel like we're insulated from a lot of this stuff, and we are. But even as homeschoolers, in the course of the last 5 years, I've noticed a sea change in the way that these places are talking about the history that they're trying to portray.
Yeah, to that point, also, what we often hear from immigrant parents is that they did not, go through everything they went through to bring their family to the United States for their children to go to school and be taught to hate their country.
Right.
And it's been interesting, right? But what's been fascinating too is it's like there's been this sort of lazy attempt to say, oh my gosh, white parents are all upset now because we're teaching honest history. But what we're seeing really is that the immigrant community is kind of beside themselves with the messaging that's coming at their children. In fact, in many ways, targeting their children as a marginalized group and then telling them all the reasons why they need to hate the country that their parents, of course, are like, this is the best country in the world. And all that we're able to do for you is only possible because we're here. So yeah,
I want to just to add to that. So in the history chapter, we write about how totalitarian societies always try to separate the family. They try to separate the child from the parent because then it makes the child far easier to indoctrinate. And that child brings home the indoctrination to the parent. But it's not just the separation of the family that totalitarians go for. It's a separation of national identity. It's a separation of shared history. That's why they make it impossible to define certain terms. The whole "what is a woman" conversation right now. If we can't know what a woman is, what do we have in common? What shared words can we have if we don't know the basic ones? So all of that, in my opinion, is by design, and it's been done before. Leftist societies throughout history have done the exact same kind of, push on separating us before.
Well, that was a great segue, because my next question was going to be about these efforts to circumvent parents. And I was working in schools until 2015. And I have to say, like, this attempt to circumvent parents or push parents out of the equation or drive a wedge between parent and child, this feels very new to me. I do not ever remember when I worked in schools between like 1998 and 2015. I just didn't see this. And it would have been unfathomable to me if my, principal or superintendent had said, you are required, as a condition of your employment, to withhold information from parents about their children. That just would have been like insane. And yet, we just put out a resource. It's a list, and it has, nearly 6,000 schools, 3.2 million children, all who are attending school in places where the policy is to keep information from parents, to make the child the driver, and they decide what their parents do and don't know. And that list is like, it's not exhaustive. It's just the beginning. So I guess, like, I'd ask the two of you, in terms of like, what is in your book, or what did you decide to put in your book around this issue of circumventing parents?
One of the most powerful stories that I heard from a parent was actually like at the 11th hour of us writing the book, and I was able to put it into the introduction. And she was a mom who had sent her daughter to a sleepaway program in California, and it was like a weekend sort of getaway at a summer camp run by her kid's school. And in the weeks leading up to the trip, she had heard about other trips from nearby towns where they had done the same thing, and they had housed the children by their gender identity instead of by their biological sex. And so she contacted her school concerned and said, I just want to make sure that my daughter will only be in bunks with girls. And in a reassuring tone, the principal told her, we will only house children according to their gender identity. And this mom was very green. She didn't pay attention to these things. And she was like, oh, okay. I guess that's a fancy way of saying, like, I mean, you're saying this to me in a reassuring manner, so I guess we're safe. And so she sent her daughter, and she had also talked to a number of other parents who had the same concern, and they were told the same thing. And they all kind of said, okay, well, then if we're being overly cautious, that's great. I'm glad that we're all on the same page. And then the kids came home after the weekend, and they said, the girls said, we had a counselor who was in our bunk the whole weekend. Their name was Nick. They had facial hair, and they went by they, them pronouns. And I don't know what this person was. I don't know what their sex was, but we were deeply uncomfortable. And the mom went to the principal, and he said, sort of gaslighting them, well, I told you that we house them according to gender identity. And finally, this mom said, what is gender identity? Like, what are you saying? And he said, we put people in bunks with the gender that they feel they are. And the mother said, so this person felt like they wanted to be in a bunk with my preteen daughter, 12. And so you put her in the same bunk as this person. Did you do any research? Did you, like, what safety mechanisms were in place here? And the principal said, I mean, the same as always. We do a background check, but, we put people in the bunks of their basic gender choosing. And this mother felt extraordinarily gaslit, and the daughter felt traumatized, honestly. And something that had happened prior to this trip was the daughter had sort of exchanged schoolyard taunts with another child in her class via text message. And he had called her a lesbian as a taunt, and she had thrown it back and said, well, you're gay. And this was the taunts that were being thrown back and forth. And for this, when the text messages were handed over to the principal, he had stripped her of her class president status. And so she kind of internalized the lesson that on any of these issues related to sexuality, you keep your mouth shut, or there are consequences that are sometimes public and deeply mortifying. And so she kept her mouth shut over the course of this weekend. She said that she barely slept because she felt scared. And her mother said, first of all, I'm angry that this happened, but also I'm scared that my daughter has internalized the message that she has to acquiesce to the feelings of others when she feels physically endangered. My daughter's safety is more important than the feelings of an adult. And this was inappropriate. And I think every adult present knew it was inappropriate, but everyone gaslit everyone. And it felt like an emperor's new clothes moment where everyone knew this was wrong and no one spoke up on behalf of the children. And this, to me, like this story encapsulated the whole problem with this ideology and how it's impacting children. And the principal said, this is state law. This is California state law. We had to do this. And it's important for parents to understand in a lot of ways, this is state law, what they're doing and icing parents out and doing these things. A lot of times they have no choice.
Yep. I live in Rhode Island, and the guidance from the Department of Education explicitly states that the child's privacy includes withholding information from parents. And that's why a teacher in Rhode Island said to me that his exact quote was, "I feel like I have to take an ethical shower every day when I get home from work." Karol, anything else on the parent-child thing we're seeing?
No, I think that really encapsulates the problem, and it's, I want to say to parents that even if they think like it's just gender, that's just the beginning. That's going to be just the beginning of the secrets that your children are going to be encouraged to keep from you, and that teachers are going to be empowered to help them keep. So I think parents really need to be careful, just dismissing this as like, oh, this is just a gender thing and my kid's not transgender, so I don't care.
Yeah. And I just want to jump in a little bit on that also, that, when I was writing the chapter on sexualization, this was before people were sort of throwing around groomer as an epithet and as an insult. But I give the actual definition of grooming in the book. And I want to make clear that just because 95% of teachers are not actually grooming children doesn't mean that this behavior of teaching children to keep secrets from their parents about matters of sexuality doesn't have potential consequences. So while the school may not be grooming your child and while their teachers may not be grooming their child, the fact remains that they are making them much more susceptible to sexual abuse down the line because they've normalized this idea of keeping secrets from parents on matters of sexual nature.
I totally agree. And I am like an anti-name calling person. So all of the calling of people groomers and other names, like the whole thing drives me crazy. But I do think that people need to draw a line between name calling with that and what grooming is. It has long been a phenomenon that people who work in the field of safeguarding children, they have always talked about this. And I think it's important for everybody to stick with talking about grooming and what that is, because one big red flag is telling children to keep secrets from the sort of dumb, noisy other stuff going on out there where everybody, where people are wearing t-shirts that say, "Okay, groomer," because the problem too is that, to Bethany's point, like when you're talking about a small percentage of people, it means that when you're out using that word, you're now insulting a lot of other people. And also a small percentage of people, when you're talking about educators, is still a very large raw number. And that's what I learned when I was, I've been advocating for years in my state because it was legal in my state for teachers to have sex with students once they were 16. And it took 5 years to get that law passed. I thought it was a no-brainer. But again, people get offended because they think that you're demeaning all teachers. And I'm like, no, it's just that wherever a lot of children spend their time, you're going to see this, whether it's the Boy Scouts, the church, the YMCA, the Boys and Girls Club, or the school. Okay. So I guess my last thing, I guess, since I want parents to feel like they've been given sort of some advice that they can take away from this, is if you just had to like give one piece of advice to parents that either was part of driving you to write the book or that you learned while you were writing the book, what would that be? Karol, I'll go to you first.
The main thing that I want parents to understand is that they if you don't like this wokeness in your kid's school, if you don't like it in our culture, I want them to understand that they are the majority. A very small segment of the population believes in any of this nonsense. And just because they're loud and are able to push their agenda in institutions and corporations and schools doesn't mean that you're the minority opinion, just because they're louder than you are. So my advice to parents really is to find people who are like-minded, to form groups together, to fight together, but really to be brave and to understand that this is not going to be easy. Fighting for your children is not going to be easy, but it is a process that will A, be rewarding, but B, is very winnable. I think that the pendulum really is starting to swing. I think that the woke have kind of worn out their welcome in our conversations. And I think that parents can get a lot of their objectives through when they realize that the fight might be long, but it'll be worth it, and that they should fight for their children.
And to that point too, also just to remember that even people who are saying that they agree with this,
Yes.
most of the time they don't. They are just really, really scared of being cast out of their tribe or their social group or
We have a lot on that.
Yeah,
A lot of
retaliation.
that on falsifying your preference in the
Yeah.
book, which is another totalitarian method of shutting down people's opinions by making them pretend to be something that they're not.
Somebody who has been working in education literally for decades said that in all of his years, he has never seen an issue where what people are saying privately is so different from what they're saying publicly.
Yeah.
So that very much confirms, and he is a partisan Democrat. So this is not you know what I mean? And he's so parents, you do need to believe us when we tell you that if you feel alone, you are not.
Yeah.
Bethany, for you, in terms of takeaways for parents.
So I wanted to tell a very quick story of something that one of my friends did recently, and sort of what this sort of building off of what Karol just said, what this looks like in practice. He sends his children to private school, and he is not a not busy guy, but he asked the school to send him the curriculum that they were using for health class. And they sent the curriculum, and he just started, a month ahead of time. If they were teaching this on October 1st, he started watching things on September 1st and reading through material. So he was always a month ahead. And he realized a month ahead that they were going to show his children a video that he found completely not age appropriate. And so he started talking to parents one-on-one, and he said, have you heard this video? Have you seen this video? And initially they said, no, but I trust the school. We sent to a private school for a reason, and I trust the school. And he just started sending parents the video, and he said, please watch this and let me know what you think. And he sent it to people one-on-one, and there became a critical mass of parents building and sending it to each other and said, have you seen this? Are you comfortable with this? And that one-on-one sort of way of approaching people was very effective, and they started individually emailing the principal until it was a class size of, let's say, 20. 17 people emailed the principal and said, I'm not comfortable with this. And the first couple people who emailed, the principal gaslit them and said, this is age appropriate. We are the experts, and we are showing this video. And if you want to pull your kid out, then that's on you, and you have to come physically and pull them out physically, because we will not supply another room for us to send your child. If you want them out, you have to physically take them out and then put them back in class when it's over, putting the onus on parents to take time out of their workday to do that. And then as more and more parents were reaching out, they eventually sort of said, we'll pull back and we won't show this video this year. We still think it's age appropriate. We're not sorry, but obviously the vast majority of you feel otherwise. And I think it's important for parents, and this is sort of my homeschooler hat on for a second, to assert the fact that you are not an expert in your child and their education. And there's a lot of educators who want to act like what they're doing is a secret science that only they understand. And it's really not that complicated to teach a child how to read and write and talk to them about history. And parents have taught their children and are teaching their children, even if they're school, every moment of the day. And your school is not an expert on your child. You are the expert on your child and the values that you want them to bring home. And you have to first sort of track what they're doing and take out what you don't like, but also proactively and sort of proactively teach your children what we believe as a family. And that was an important message also when they took their kid out of that situation. Instead of just not showing them that video, they said, this is what we believe as a family. And that is an incredibly important sort of talking point for parents as well.
Okay, now on to plugging the book. So this is the book, everybody. And Karol, where can people get this?
You can get it at Amazon. You can get it at Barnes & Noble, anywhere you buy books.
Okay. And as I said, it's been on the market, I believe, for, is it 6 days? I think it was
8 days.
My bad. Okay, so it's been 8 days. And it is already an Amazon bestseller. It is also a Publishers Weekly bestseller. And again, those of you that have been followers of ours for a long time, much of this will be familiar, especially in the education stuff, but there's still tons more in here that you probably don't know. And then for those of you that are sort of new to PDE, let me just tell you that everything about education in schools that I read in this book is confirmed for me every single day doing the work for this organization. And I don't mean just because someone tells me, I mean, because we're literally looking at, documents from schools, etc. So, all right, anything else you guys want to add that I didn't ask?
No, it's great. Thank you for having us.
All right. Well, with that, this has been PDE Book TV. And thank you so much to our authors, Karol and Bethany, for joining us. And thank you to all of you who tuned in to watch. And with that, I am signing off. Take care, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you.